Welcome back to This is Thailand, the channel where we sit down with the men who came here looking for something and tell you honestly what they found. Tonight's story belongs to Murray, 63 years old, from Red Deer, Alberta, by way of 31 years on drilling crews in the oil patch north of Fort McMurray. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, for 3 decades. A big, quiet man with hands like a pair of work gloves left out in the rain. Here's what makes Murray different from a lot of the men we talk to. He didn't arrive in Thailand with money. He arrived already broken, already emptied out, and the thing that emptied him had nothing to do with this country at all. It happened back home, in an office in Calgary with a man he'd known since the 90s. So he came here with what was left. Not much. A pension, a bit of savings, and a plan he'd worked out on the back of a receipt. And this is the part that stays with me. Murray isn't going to tell you he was robbed. He's going to tell you something harder than that. He's going to tell you he'd been walking around for 31 years with a sign on him that he couldn't see and that everybody else could. The title of this one asks whether you might be one of the three. Murray found out the answer about himself. Took him 14 months. Here's his story in his own words. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That's the whole shape of my life if you want it in 5 words. 31 years of it. You fly out of Edmonton on a Tuesday, you're at camp by supper, and then it's 14 days of the same. Up at 4:30, the trailer, the rig, back to the trailer. Somebody's got a hockey game on in the rec room, and there's a guy in the corner who won't stop talking about his boat. Then a plane home and 14 days of standing in your own kitchen, not knowing what to do with your hands. People hear oil patch and they think money. And yeah, there was money. There was decent money, but nobody tells you what the rotation does to the rest of it. You can't join anything. Can't be on a team, can't take a course, can't be the guy who shows up every Thursday because half the Thursdays you're 1,200 kilometers north eating powdered eggs. My marriage went in 98. Colleen, and I want to be straight about this because I think it matters. There was no fight, not one. She didn't leave me for anybody. I didn't do anything to her. Nobody threw a plate. She just sat down one Sunday and said she thought we'd be better off. And I said, okay. That's it. That's the whole divorce. And honestly, I think about that more than I think about most things that happened to me, because a fight would have meant there was something in there worth fighting about. There wasn't. We'd been roommates who overlapped every second week, and we'd both run out of anything to say about it. So then it's just work. Derrick hand for a long stretch, driller later on. And I was good at it. I want to say that. I was quiet on the floor and I didn't make mistakes, and if you gave me a number, I'd hit it. 31 years of a man in a hard hat telling me where to stand, and me standing there. That was my whole talent when you get down to it. Standing where I was put. Took the buyout at 61. And here's the thing nobody warns you about. I'd spent 31 years dreaming about waking up with nowhere to be, and then I woke up with nowhere to be, and it about killed me. 3 weeks in, I was going to the Canadian Tire in the morning just to have gone somewhere, buying things I didn't need so I'd have a reason to come back for the return. That's when Ronnie called. Ronnie'd been my crew boss back in the Suncor days. Big, loud fella, always had a plan, always had 4 guys who'd follow him anywhere, and he'd got into a private outfit, oil field services, valves, and pump rebuilds, servicing the same operators we'd both worked for our whole lives. He needed capital. He was offering in. And you have to understand how that sounded to me. It wasn't some stranger on the phone. It wasn't crypto or whatever the hell. It was guys we knew, guys we'd worked with. I could name half the customer list. I'd stood beside those men in minus 40, $310,000. That was the buyout, plus about everything I'd banked since Colleen. I didn't agonize over it. That's the part one have trouble explaining. I looked at the paperwork for maybe an hour and I thought, well, I know this business better than I know anything else on earth, and I signed it. 18 months. Crude went in the floor. The company was leveraged up past its eyebrows, which I didn't know and didn't ask and could have asked. And one Tuesday in March, there's a receivership notice in a manila envelope and a lawyer in Calgary explaining to me in a very gentle voice that there is nothing to recover. Nothing. And then he sent me a bill for explaining it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you my heart broke over the money. That's not what happened. What happened was worse than that, and it's harder to describe. I'd been certain. That's the whole thing. I'd been completely, quietly, 31 years of experience certain. And I was wrong. And after that, every single thing I thought, should I take this apartment? Should I sell the truck? Is this fella telling me the truth? It all felt like flipping a coin. Like I'd been handed a set of instruments and been told they'd been reading wrong the entire time, and nobody'd bothered to mention it. I called my sister Sheila in Kelowna to tell her. I told her I'd lost about 100 grand. I don't know why I did that. She's my sister. She'd have been fine about it. I think I just couldn't get the real number out of my mouth. It's been 3 years and she still thinks it was 100. If she watches this, well, sorry, Sheila. So, 62 years old, a house in Red Deer with a mortgage still on it, a pension and CPP coming to about $1,500 a month, and $26,000 left in the bank. In Alberta, that's not living. That's just slowly running out. Dougie's the one who put Thailand in my head. Worked with him at the Nisku shop years back, retired to a place called Jom Tien, just down from Pattaya. And every single morning, he'd put a photo on Facebook of his balcony. Same photo. Cup of coffee, the sea, some construction crane in the corner. Every morning for 2 years. I was in the Tim Hortons on Getz Avenue when I actually did the arithmetic, wrote it on the back of the receipt, which I still have, which probably tells you something about me. Rent, food, the beer, the visa business. And it came out that everything I had would go about 4 times as far over there as it went where I was sitting. 4 times. I want to be clear about something, because I know what channel you're watching, and I know what you're expecting. I wasn't going for women. I never even thought about it. I hadn't been on a date since the Cretan government, and I'd made my peace with that a long time ago. I was going because I was poor now, and in Red Deer being poor felt like a verdict on me. Like everybody could see it, and it turned out there was a place on the other side of the world where the same money made me ordinary instead. Sold the house in the September, flew out of Calgary the 11th of November, through Taipei, 17 hours in the air. 59 kilos of luggage and no idea whatsoever what I was doing. The heat hit me on the air bridge in Bangkok. Not the tarmac, the air bridge, before I'd even got off the thing. Like walking into a laundry room where somebody's left the dryer open. Took a taxi down to Yom Tien and Dougie met me outside a 7-Eleven with a bottle of water and a grin. First thing he said was, "You're going to hate the first month." Second thing was, "Then you'll be fine." He was about half right. The room I took was on a sewai off the Praia, 9,000 baht a month, which is about 350 Canadian. 5th floor, aircon that rattled, a fridge, a plastic wardrobe, a bathroom where the shower was just the whole room. And I want to tell you what's on the walls in that room, because it's important to who I was at the time. Nothing. Nothing was on the walls. I lived in that room for 11 months, and I never put one thing on the wall. Never bought a picture, never bought a plant, never bought a second chair in case somebody came over. I'd furnished it exactly like a camp trailer, because that's the only kind of room I knew how to be in. Now here's the thing about the culture shock. Everybody warns you about the heat and the traffic and the fact that a bot bus doesn't have a schedule, and you just bang on the roof when you want off. That stuff took me about 10 days. That stuff's fine. What got me was 10 in the morning. I'd wake up around 5 out of 31 years of habit. Roosters going, some fella's motorbike, the temple over on Praia doing whatever it does at dawn. And I'd have my coffee out on the little balcony, and I'd watch the monks come down the sewai in the orange robes with their bowls, and the ladies kneeling on the pavement with the rice. Beautiful, honestly. Best part of the day. And then it'd be about 9:30, and I'd have done everything I could think of to do. That's a long day, that. That is a very long day. In camp, somebody hands you 14 hours of what to do. Take that away from a man at 62, and he doesn't feel free. He feels like a dog in an empty yard. I'd walk down Jom Tien Beach Road just to be walking. I'd go to the food land and buy one thing at a time so I'd have to go back tomorrow. Same trick as the Canadian Tire, different hemisphere. Dougie was good to me, mine. Took me to Jom Tien Immigration and stood in the queue with me while I sorted the retirement visa. You need 800,000 baht sat in a Thai bank, seasoned, which for me meant almost every dollar I had left in the world, sitting in a Bangkok bank account doing nothing. That's about 31,000 Canadian more or less, and it was not a decision I took lightly. Showed me the 90-day reporting, showed me where to get chicken and rice for 60 baht, showed me which pharmacy doesn't do farang pricing, and he took me to the coffee morning. Wednesdays, place off soy buakhao, big table out the back, 10 or 12 fellas. English mostly, couple of Aussies, a Dutch guy who never said anything. And I'll be straight with you, I went twice and I couldn't stomach it, because it was grievances. That's all it was. That's what I decided. One fella spent 20 minutes on his 90-day report. 20 minutes. Another one telling me about a bloke he knew who built a house in Buriram and lost the lot. And then another one's got a version of the same story about Udon Thani, and they'd all lean in when they got to the part about whose name it went in. And there was a Yorkshireman there, Ray, older than me, and he asked me, pleasant enough, whether I'd got a girlfriend yet. I said no, and he said good, keep it that way for 6 months. I remember thinking, who the hell are you? I'd been off the plane about 3 weeks, hadn't met a soul, and here's a room full of men warning me about women I'd never laid eyes on, like I was a kid they had to keep off the road. Bitter, I thought. That's what I decided about them, and I decided it fast. Bitter old farangs sat around picking the scab, and the reason they've got nothing better to do is nobody's got any use for them. So I stopped going. I want to be honest about how quick that was and how sure I was, because that decision cost me more than any single thing I did afterwards. 14 months later, I walked back into that same room and sat at that same table, and it turned out I'd been wrong about every man in it. But that's later. The laundry was on a little side soi off Buhao near the Chinese temple. Wash and fold, 40 baht a kilo, and they'd done a couple of tables of coffee out front. The sweet ice stuff in a plastic bag with the straw, an instant, and a fan going. 2 washing machines, a rack of shirts, and a smell I still associate with that whole year, which is detergent and wet concrete and Mu-Ping smoke off the cart on the corner. I'd started going most mornings because it was somewhere to go, and I'd sit there with the iced coffee and watch the soi. Nok worked the front. She was 39, Isan from a village outside Royet. Divorced, and she had a girl, Ploy, 9 years old, living up there with her mother. Small woman, and she'd have her hair up with a pen through it, and she moved fast. She never once walked across that shop. She'd sort of dart. And the first thing you should know, the thing I hung everything on afterwards, is that it wasn't a bar, right? I need you to hear that the way I heard it at the time. I'd been in Pattaya 3 months. I'd walked down Walking Street once, out of curiosity, and come straight back out again, like a man who'd opened the wrong door. Nothing about that world made any sense to me, and I wanted no part of it. This was a woman with detergent on her hands, doing 40 baht a kilo washing at 8 in the morning. That's what I told myself. That's a working woman. We got talking because she laughed at my Thai. I'd been trying to order the coffee, and I'd got the tone wrong on something, and she just about had to sit down. And then she started correcting me, properly, making me say it again. Kafai yen, over and over. And every morning after that, she'd give me one new word and test me on yesterday's, which is the first thing anybody had bothered to teach me since about 1994. Weeks went by like that. She'd sit down when it was quiet, told me about Ploy, showed me photos on her phone, the girl in her school uniform with the white socks, told me about her mother's legs, asked me about the snow, which she'd never seen and didn't believe in. And one Sunday, she took me on the back of her scooter up to the market at Naklua. She drove. I sat on the back like a sack of feed, 63 years old, hanging on to the seat rail. And she bought the som tam and she paid for it. And when I got my wallet out, she pushed my hand down and said, "Today, me." I tried to pay for things maybe 4 or 5 times over those weeks. She wouldn't have it, not once. 11 weeks. That's how long it went before there was any money in it at all. And I counted, because I was aware enough to be counting. And she asked me a question in there somewhere that I've never got out of my head. We were sat out front, and it was raining, that stupid hard rain, where it's over in 10 minutes. And she said to me, "Why you never say what you want?" And I sat there, and I couldn't answer her. I never answered her, by the way, that question. I sat there with the rain coming off the awning in a sheet, and I thought about it. And the honest answer was that I'd never in my life been in a room where anybody wanted to know. But something shifted after that. We went from being a fella who buys coffee and a woman who sells it to something else. And I couldn't tell you the day it happened. There wasn't a day. There was just a point where she started texting me online in the evenings about nothing. A photo of her dinner, a sticker of a cartoon rabbit, 10 of them in a row, and a point after that where I stopped going back to my own room. Her room was above the laundry, up a concrete stair around the side, past the water tanks. And I want to describe it properly because it matters to what I did next. Maybe 3 meters by 4. A mattress on the floor, a fan, a rail of clothes, and one of those little plug-in cookers. Shared wall with a family of 4. The baby went off about 2 in the morning most nights, and you could hear the telly through the block like it was in the room with you. Damp coming up the corner by the window. No aircon, obviously. In April in Pattaya, that's not a small thing. Rent was 6,500 baht, 255 Canadian. So I said, let me get that. And she said no. Said it flat, straight off, no thinking about it. Said she work, she pay. And I let it go. And a week later I brought it up again, and she said no again. And this time she was a bit sharp with me about it, and I dropped it. Third time, I just did it. Went down and paid the woman who owns the block. 3 months up front. 19,500. And told Knock afterwards. She was angry with me. Actually properly angry. Went quiet the whole evening and slept turned away from me. Next morning she made me a coffee I hadn't asked for and never mentioned it again. Now, I have turned those 3 refusals over so many times that I've worn the corners off them. Because here's what I did with them at the time. I filed them as proof. This is not a woman who wants my money, I thought. This is a woman I had to argue with twice to let me pay $255. And I'll tell you where I've landed on it now, 3 years on, and you can make of it what you like. I think those refusals were real. I do. I don't think she was running a play on me with a stopwatch. But I also think there's a way of refusing something that leaves the door propped open. And she knew how to do that. And probably she'd learned it without ever deciding to learn it, the way you learn anything you need. Both of those things can be true. That's the part it took me the longest to get. Anyway, once I was paying the rent, I sat down and did the arithmetic properly, because that's what I am. Pension and CPP came to about 1,580 Canadian, which at the time was, call it, 40,000 baht. And the little bit off the interest, maybe another 5. So 45,000 a month coming in. Out, my room 9,000, hers 6.5, food for the 2 of us, maybe 8, the scooter petrol and the odd bill and a chang or 2 of an evening. Say 28, 30,000 out. 15,000 baht a month clear. Do you understand what that felt like? I hadn't had a spare dollar at the end of a month since 2019. In Red Deer, every month was subtraction. Every single month, I was watching the 26,000 go down like a fuel gauge. And here I am, 63, sat in a plastic chair on a soi off Buakaw with a woman correcting my tie. And I'm running a surplus. That's what did it. Not romance. That. March is when her mother's legs came up properly. Diabetes. Type 2. Badly managed for years the way it is up there. A village outside Roy Et. The nearest proper hospital an hour. And the government scheme covers a lot, but it doesn't cover everything, and it doesn't cover getting there. The mother was 58. Circulation in the feet was going. There was a wound on the left one that had been there 4 months. Knox showed me a photo of it on her phone at the laundry table at 8 in the morning and then apologized for showing me. The number was 22,000 baht for the clinic in Royet, the proper one, plus the medication and the strips for the meter and the bus for her mother and her mother's sister to get down there. About $860. I sent it that afternoon. Bangkok Bank app took 90 seconds. And I want to be very clear on this one, because I'm going to tell you a lot of things later on that turned out to be rubbish. And this wasn't one of them. That was real, every baht of it. I've seen the receipts since. I went and found them after when I was checking everything. And I've seen the woman's foot. And I have never once regretted that money, and I never will. Her mother's still alive. She's got both feet. If that's the worst thing I did in Thailand, I'd have come home a happy man. Songkran was the middle of April. Nobody tells a Canadian what Songkran actually is. Dougie said water festival, and I pictured, I don't know, kids with a hose. What it is that the entire of Beach Road turns into a war for 3 days. Blokes on the back of pickups with barrels, kids with super soakers the size of artillery, ice water, some old dear on a corner who gets you with a bucket and then puts the white clay on your face with her thumb and says something blessing you, and you've no idea what. And I'm 63 years old and I've got no reflexes and I got absolutely destroyed. I was out with Knock and 4 of the laundry girls, and Fern's her cousin, worked the same shop, and you'll hear more about Fern. And they used me as a shield the entire day because a big soaked farang standing there, gormless draws fire. They thought that was the funniest thing that had ever happened. Papa Murray. They called me Papa Murray after that, all of them. Right to the end. At about 4 in the afternoon, I was stood in the middle of Soi Buakhao, soaked to the skin, clay on my face, holding a bucket, with a woman on either side of me screaming, and I realized I hadn't thought about money in about 6 hours. Not once. First time since the receivership letter. I'd like to leave it there, but there's one other thing from that spring I have to put in, because it's the first loose thread, and I want you to see me not pull it. She'd told me in February that her ex-husband was in Bangkok, working, Rang Sit Way, something with a warehouse. Then in April, out at a Som Tom place near the Chinese temple, she said something about him being in Korat. And I said, I thought he was in Bangkok. And she said, before Bangkok, now Korat. Except she told me the Bangkok thing in February, and it's April. And Korat was where he'd been before, the way she told it the second time. That's not the same story. I heard it. I want that on the record. I heard it and I clocked it, and I sat there with my sticky rice, and I thought, her English is about 400 words and my Thai is about 40, and I've been getting tenses wrong in this country since the day I landed. So I let it go. That's not me being stupid. That's me doing what I'd done my whole working life. You don't ask a man about his personal business. Somebody tells you where to stand, you stand there. Dougie asked me in May whether I'd been up to Royette yet. Met the family, and I said, yeah, we'll do that. Soon as the mother's better. I meant it when I said it too. The truck came up in May. Her brother's Beam, 28, lives up in the village outside Royette. A Toyota Vago, secondhand, and he got behind on it, 4 payments behind. And the way it was put to me was that if the truck goes, Beam can't work. And if Beam can't work, then Knock's the only one sending anything home to the mother and the girl. 18,000 baht. 700 Canadian. I sent it. Then in June it was ploy school. The fees themselves aren't much up there. It's the rest of it, the uniform and the shoes and the books, and some fun the school runs that I never fully understood. 9,000 baht, $350. And Knox showed me the girl in the new uniform online, standing very straight in front of a wall, not smiling because Thai kids don't smile in those photos, and I'd be lying if I said that didn't do something to me. Then in July we moved. That one was mine, honestly. I'd been sleeping on that mattress with the baby going off through the wall for 3 months, and I'm 63 with a back that's been on a rig floor since 1993. We found a place on a SOY off 3rd Road. Proper 1-bedroom, aircon, a kitchen you could stand in, a balcony you could get a chair on. Deposit 20,000, rent 11 a month. And that's the point where I gave up my own room, which felt like a big thing at the time. Wasn't sentimental about it, just noticed that I'd had a bolt hole, and now I didn't. So here's where the arithmetic had got to by August. Rent 11, electric with the aircon on maybe 3, food for us 8 or 9, the money going up to Royette, which by now was a standing 10,000 a month for the mother and the girl, plus whatever else came up. And something always came up. 30 to 35,000 baht a month, 1,300 Canadian, against 45 coming in. Now, if you're sat there thinking, well, he's still inside his income, that's not so bad. You're doing exactly what I did, because there was no month where it stopped at 35. There was the month of the phone, the month the scooter needed the whole front end, Songkran, then the mother's birthday, then a funeral in the village for somebody I'd never met, which is a real expense here and a real obligation, and I'm not going to sneer at it. And the difference came out of the 26,000. Well, what was left of it after 800,000 baht was locked in the bank for the visa. So I'm talking about the loose money, the bit outside the visa account. First time it was $2,000, then 3.5, then 2 again. And here's the thing I want you to hear, because this is the whole of it. This is the actual mechanism, and it's got nothing to do with a woman being clever. Not one of those requests was unreasonable. Go through them. A man's truck, a kid's school shoes, a room with aircon for a 63-year-old with a bad back, a funeral, diabetes medication. If somebody had come to me with any one of those on its own, I'd have said yes 10 times out of 10, and so would you. I never once added them up. 31 years. 31 years of a company man telling me the scope of the job, this depth, this budget, get it done. And me getting it done. Somebody else always drew the box, and I worked inside the box, and I was proud of how well I worked inside the box. Nobody ever taught me to draw the box. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of it. And I didn't understand it about myself until Ray said it out loud to me a year later. The story started going wrong around then too. The truck loan. In May, it was with a bank. Some finance company through the dealer in Royette. That's what I understood. And in September, in the kitchen of the new place, she said something about the man who has the paper for the truck and how he was being difficult. And I said, what man? Man in village, have paper. Which is a different thing entirely, isn't it? That's not a finance company. That's a fellow with money in a village lending at whatever he feels like, which is a real thing up there, and I know that now. But it isn't what I'd been told in May. And there was Beam himself. In May, Beam was a driver. That was the whole point. That's why the truck mattered. He drives. In October, she said something offhand about Beam not having worked for a long time now. More than a year. More than a year. 2 things I noticed, 2. And I want to be fair to myself here, because I did notice them. I'm not sat here pretending I was blind. I noticed, and then I did the thing I always did. I told myself it was the language. And honestly, part of it probably was. Her English was maybe 400 words on a good day, and my Thai never got past being able to order food and say sorry. We got tenses wrong in both directions constantly. There's no past perfect in Thai the way we've got it. I looked that up afterwards, which tells you something about how badly I wanted an explanation. But I could have asked. That's the bit. I could have sat down and said, Nook, tell me about the truck again from the start. And I didn't. And the reason I didn't wasn't language. It was that I didn't want the answer to be bad. The other thing was Royette. I brought it up first in June. Let's go up, meet your mom, meet Ploy. And she said the roads were terrible in rainy season, which they are. So, August. And in August, her mother wasn't well enough for visitors, which given the foot was plausible. And in October, she said something that I think was the truest thing she ever said to me on the subject, which was that the house is not good. I don't want you see. Now that's face. That's real. I know that now, that a woman from a village with a tin roof and a dirt yard genuinely does not want the farang sat in it because of what her neighbors will say and what he'll think, and because she's spent every month telling everyone up there that things are good. So I was right about that. That's what makes this so slippery. I was right about the reason, and being right about it let me stop asking. 3 deflections in 5 months, and I filed every one of them under Kringjai and told myself I was being culturally sensitive. There's a word for a man who's being culturally sensitive about not being allowed to meet anybody's family. I just didn't know it yet. By November, I'd been in Thailand a year. The visa renewal came round, and I sat in Yom Tien Immigration with my folder of photocopies. Bank book, letters. The photo of me stood outside my own front door, holding a sign like a hostage. They make you do that. And I remember looking at the bank statement while I waited. 800,000 baht in the visa account, untouched. 15,500 Canadian left in the loose money. Down about 10.5 from when I landed. And I sat on that plastic chair with the number tickers going and the fans turning, and I got that feeling right in the chest. Same one I'd had in the lawyer's office in Calgary, and the same one I'd had, and this is the part one didn't let myself think about 4 months before Ronnie's company went under, when the email started going quiet. I know that feeling. I've had it twice, and both times it was right. And I sat there and I told it to shut up, because that feeling had been wrong once. Catastrophically wrong. It had told me Ronnie was solid, and it had cost me $310,000. And I'd promised myself I'd never trust the damn thing again. So I didn't. I got my stamp, and I got a bot bus back up Sukhumvit, and I bought a bag of Mooping on the corner for the two of us. And by the time I got in the door, I'd talked myself out of it entirely. The land came up on a Sunday in December, and it came up sideways, the way everything did. We were eating at that Som Tam place near the Chinese temple, the one with the plastic stools and the dog that lives under the ice chest. And she was on the phone to her mother for about 20 minutes, which was normal. And when she put it down, she said her mother was upset, and I said, why? And she told me about the land. 40 rai outside the village. Been in the family somehow, or half in the family. I never got it completely straight. There was a cousin involved. There was a grandmother who died. There was a share that had gone somewhere it shouldn't have. And now a cousin needed to sell it fast because of a debt in Konkan. And it was going for 400,000 baht. And if the family didn't take it, it'd go to somebody outside and be gone forever. 400,000 baht. 15,700 Canadian. And I sat on that plastic stool with the Som Tam going in the pestle behind me. That noise, thump, thump, thump. You hear it everywhere in this country, and I still can't hear it without thinking about that conversation. And I did the arithmetic without meaning to, because that's what I do. I had about 15,500 Canadian outside the Visa account. It was everything. Not most of it, everything. She didn't ask me for it that day. I want to be precise about this because it matters. She told me about it, and she was upset, and then she changed the subject and we went home. She never once, in the whole of the next 3 weeks, said the words, "Will you pay for it?" That's not me defending her. That's me telling you how it actually works, which is that nobody ever says the sentence you're braced for. Whose name would it be in? I asked her a few days later. My mother, she said, and she said it like I'd asked what color the sky was. And here's the thing. I knew the law. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some innocent who didn't know a foreigner can't own land in Thailand. You can't get through a week in Pattaya without somebody telling you that. And I'd read it on the forums, and I'd heard it at that damn coffee morning from a man whose mate lost a house in Burrum. I knew it. I just thought that knowing it protected me. That's the stupidest thing I've ever thought, and I've thought some stupid things. I genuinely believe that because I understood the risk in advance, I'd somehow already accounted for it. Like a man reading the safety card on a plane. Then there was the other part of it. She started talking about Ploy's future. Land is the only thing up there that means anything. You can't lose it, it doesn't go bad, and if the girl's got land, she's got something when everybody else has nothing. And she talked about her mother, whose feet are the way they are, being able to die on land that's hers. And then, lightly, in the car once, not even looking at me, she said something about how after, maybe we could talk to her mother properly, do things the right way. Sin sod, the whole thing, in front of the family, so nobody up there could say anything about her again. Never a demand, never a condition, just laid down next to the other thing, the way you'd put two photographs on a table. Now here's where I have to be honest about myself in a way I don't enjoy. It wasn't her that got me, it was me. I was 63 years old and I had produced nothing. 31 years, and what have I got to show for it? Hours. I sold hours. There's no building anywhere with my name on it. There's no kid of mine. There's no business. There's a hole in the ground in northern Alberta with somebody else's logo on the sign, and that's my life's work. And here was a chance to have made something. To be a man who provided. 40 rye with a girl's name on it in 40 years' time. That's the hook. Not the woman. That. And it's the same hook Ronnie had in me, if you want the truth. And it took me a long time to see the two of them side by side. Anyway, second week of December, I went back to the coffee morning. I couldn't tell you why. I've thought about it a lot since. I've decided it was something in me trying to get an answer out of somebody without having to ask a question, which is about as close to asking for help as I've ever got in my life. 9 months I'd been away. Nobody made anything of it. Ray was there, older and thinner than I remembered, and there was a big Aussie called Kev, and the Dutch fella still not saying anything. Somebody bought me a coffee. Somebody asked about my 90-day report, and God help me, I answered. And about halfway through, I mentioned the land. Not asking. Telling. Sort of pleased with myself, if I'm honest. Here's the fella who's been away 9 months, and he's got a girlfriend and a proper apartment, and now he's buying land in Nissan. And the table went quiet. Not dramatic. Nobody gasped. Nobody put a drink down hard. It was just that two of them found something to look at. Kev got very interested in his phone. The Dutch fella looked out at the SOI, and Ray said, pleasant as anything. Whose name's it going in? And I said her mother's, obviously. And I said it like that, like he was thick, like he was some old fool who didn't know how the law works in the country he'd lived in for 18 years. And Ray nodded and said, right. And then he asked Kev something about a motorbike. That was it. That was the whole warning. 6 words and a nod and a change of subject. I left about 10 minutes later and I was furious. I got a bot bus up 2nd Road, and I sat on the bench in the back with the wind coming through, and I built a case against those men the entire way home. Jealous, that's what I decided. Sat there in their 60s and 70s with nobody, watching a fella come in the door with something they haven't got, and the only thing they can do about it is go quiet and let you feel it. Poisoned, I thought. They've spent so long telling each other horror stories that they can't see a good thing when it's sat at the table. I want you to hear how sure I was, because if you're watching this and you're the sort of fella who's ever thought the bitter expats about the men who tried to slow you down, I'm not judging you. I'm telling you I was there, and I was completely certain, and I was standing right in the middle of being wrong. Ray wasn't jealous of me. Ray had a Thai wife of 22 years and 2 grown daughters in Khon Kaen. I found that out later. I transferred the first $120,000 on the 19th of December. For the deposit, to hold it so the cousin couldn't sell it out from under. 4,700 Canadian, into her mother's account, Bangkok Bank app. 90 seconds, same as the medicine. And I remember exactly what I did afterwards, and it's the daftest detail in this whole story. I went down to the 7-Eleven on the corner, and I bought a toasted ham and cheese in one of those Chang tall boys, and I sat on the balcony in the dark with the aircon units dripping off the building next door, and the bar music coming up from 3rd Road. And I felt good. I felt like a man who'd done something. 280,000 baht still to go. We'd agreed I'd send it in the new year, after the paperwork at the land office. And in the last week of December, Fern asked me if we could have a talk. Fern had worked in that laundry the entire time I'd known Knock. 2 years older, cousin on the mother's side, quiet, did the ironing mostly. She'd been at Songkran with us. She'd called me Papa Murray, same as the rest. And in the last week of December, she asked me, in English, carefully, like she'd practiced it, if we could talk somewhere, not here. We went to a beer bar off Soi Bu Khao at 4 in the afternoon, which is the deadest a bar in Pattaya ever gets. Nobody in it but a girl doing Connect 4 with herself and the fans going, and that smell they've all got, stale beer and disinfectant in the drain. She had a Chang, I had a Chang. I didn't finish mine, and I've thought since that's the only time in my life I've left a beer. She told me straight out. No working up to it. There's a man in Roy Et, Thai man in the village, 4 years. Everybody knows. Knock's mother knows. Ploy calls him something that isn't his name, and I sat there. I didn't shout. I want to be honest about my own reaction because I think people expect something else. I didn't stand up and knock the table over. I said, right. That's what I said. Right. Then she told me the rest of it, and the rest of it was worse. The land had been offered before. There was an Englishman 4 or 5 years back, Rugby or Reading, one of them. Fern didn't know. She'd only seen him twice. And before that, a Swedish fella. Both of them had been told about a cousin who needed to sell fast. Neither of them ever saw a title deed. She didn't know how much either of them had put in, and I didn't ask because I didn't want a number in my head to compare mine to. Same land, same cousin, same debt in Khon Kaen. And I said to her, and this is the only question I could get out. I said, why are you telling me? Because Fern had a reason. She's not a saint, and I'm not going to make her one for the sake of a tidy story. Her own mother had a share in that land, or believed she did, and it had gone somewhere in the paperwork after the grandmother died. And Fern and Knock's mother hadn't spoken properly in 18 months over it. She had a dog in the fight. She told me that herself, by the way. I didn't have to work it out. She said it plain. I am angry with them, and also this is true. And I've thought about that a lot. A person can be settling a score and telling you the truth in the same breath. Those aren't opposites. I'd spent my whole life dismissing what people said because of why they were saying it. And I'd have dismissed Ray for being bitter, and Fern for being angry. And where exactly does that leave a man? Sat on his own with nobody left to believe. Then she told me the part that took the ground out from under me. She said Knock likes you. Really? She said it like she was defending her. Said she'd heard Knox say it to the other girls when I wasn't there. Unprompted, not for effect. That Papa Murray's a good man. Kind, never shouts, never drinks too much. Said Knock had cried once about something to do with me. She didn't know what. And I said, but the man in the village. And Fern looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't have. Because in her head and in Knock's head, and in that whole family's head, those two things had never been in a fight with each other. Not once. There was a man at home, and there was a Farang in Pattaya, who was kind to her and helped the family, and both of those things were just true. The way the weather's true. I was the one who'd built a contradiction out of it and then stood underneath it while it came down. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the thing I most needed to understand, and the thing I understood last. I wasn't lied to about a feeling. She wasn't pretending to like me. She actually did like me. I'd bet money on it now, and I haven't got much money to bet. I was just never in the conversation I thought I was in. I spent the next 4 days checking things because that's the only way I know how to handle anything. 31 years of tripping out a string and inspecting every joint. The clinic in Royette. Real. I got Fern to help me, and we found the receipts and the medication, and the woman's foot is on the men, and she still got it. Real. Every bot. The school. Real. The uniform, the fund, all of it. Not much money, but real money. The truck, nothing. No finance company, no man in the village, no Vigo. Beam had a wave he'd had for 6 years. I couldn't find a single thing that 18,000 baht touched. It's not the biggest number in this story, and it's the one that bothers me most, because it's the one where somebody sat and made something up. And the land was real. 40 Rai sat there outside the village, in her mother's name for the last 9 years, and nobody selling it to anybody. There was no cousin in Konkin. There was no debt. There was no deadline. There had never been a single moment when it was going to be gone forever. I did not send the 280,000. That's the sentence, isn't it? That's the whole of what I got right in 14 months, and I'd like more credit for it than I deserve. 280,000 baht, near enough 11,000 Canadian, sat in the Bangkok Bank on the 3rd of January, and it's still mine. Not because I was clever, because a woman with a grudge sat me down in a dead bar and said something out loud. I told Knock on the 4th of January, in the flat with the aircon on. I said I'd been talking to Fern and I said the man's name, and she didn't deny it. I'll give her that, and I've given it to her 100 times since. Not 1 second of denying. She went very still, and then she got angry, and I mean properly angry, in a way I'd never seen out of her. Not caught out angry. Wronged. She said I'd been talking about her family behind her back. She said Fern is a bad person, which given the circumstances was quite a thing to lead with. She said I'd made her lose face in front of the shop, in front of the girls who'd called me Papa Murray, and that she couldn't go back to work there now, and that everybody would know. And she was crying by the end, and I don't believe it was performance. I've turned it over, and I don't. And then she said the thing I've carried around ever since. She said, why you care? He is Thailand, you are Pattaya. I look after you good. Why you care? And I stood there in my own kitchen at 64 years old, and I could not answer her. Not in Thai, not in English, not in anything. Because to explain why I cared, I'd have had to explain what I thought we were, and I'd never once said it out loud, to her or to anybody, in the entire 14 months. Not once had I said the word girlfriend. Not once had I said, this is what I expect. I'd never told her what the deal was. I just assumed she was reading a contract I'd never handed her. She was gone in about 10 days, took her clothes, left the rice cooker. Here's the tally, and I've done it more times than is good for me. 14 months. Rent on the room above the laundry, the clinic in Royette, the truck that never existed, the uniform, the deposit on the flat, the funeral, the 14 months of a standing 10,000 a month, and the 120,000 baht I put down on a piece of land that was never for sale. Comes to about 9,000 Canadian, all in, over and above what I'd have spent living on my own. 9,000. Now I know what some of you are thinking, because I've thought it myself at 3 in the morning. 9 grand? Fellas lose houses out here. There's men at that coffee table who've lost 500,000 baht in one afternoon, and one who lost a house in Buriram and had to fly home at 71 and move in with his daughter. $9,000 is not a tragedy. It's a bad year. And I'll tell you what nobody warns you about, which is that getting off light doesn't feel like winning. It feels worse in a way, because you don't get to be a victim. A victim's got a story with a shape to it. All I've got is 14 months of a man saying yes and then stopping just before the end. And the only reason I stopped is that somebody else's family row happened to spill onto me. I didn't save myself. I got saved. There's a difference, and I've never been able to talk myself out of it. I moved in February, smaller place further back off 3rd Road, 7,000 a month, no balcony worth sitting on. And when I was packing up the flat, I found a rice cooker in the cupboard, and I stood there holding it for probably a full minute. Because here's the thing I have to say, and I've had people not like me for saying it. I'm not bitter about her. I've tried to be. Some nights I've had a go at it. But I sit down and I actually do the arithmetic properly, the way I do everything, and it comes out like this. She gave me 14 months where I wasn't eating alone. She gave me Songkran, which is the single best day I've had since about 1996. Stood in the middle of Soi Buakhao, soaked through with clay on my face. She taught me maybe 200 words of Thai, and she was patient about it. She called me Papa Murray. She was the first person in 25 years who asked me what I wanted, and it cost me $9,000. I've paid more than that for less. I paid $310,000 to a man I'd known for 30 years, and I got a lawyer's bill out of it, so no, not bitter. What I am is embarrassed, which is a different animal, and it lives longer. I went back to the Wednesday coffee morning in March. Took me 11 weeks to make myself do it. And I want to tell you what I found there, because I had it completely wrong, and I'd had it wrong from 3 weeks off the plane. They're not a chorus of failures. That's what I decided at the table with my 9 months of nothing behind me, and my superiority sat right there on my face where everybody could see it. There's about 14 of them, and some of them are exactly what I thought. Sour, stuck, telling the same story about 2011 forever. Fine. But there's also Kev, who's been married 18 years and runs a business his wife legally owns and has never lost a night's sleep over it. And there's the Dutch fella, who I finally got a sentence out of, and he's got 2 grandkids in Nakhon Sawan. And there's Ray, who's got a wife of 22 years in Khon Kaen and 2 grown daughters, and who tried to save me with 6 words in December and got told to mind his business. The difference between the bitter ones and the happy ones isn't luck. It's who learns something. Ray's the one who gave me the thing I'm going to leave you with. It wasn't a speech. It was over a coffee with the fans going and a bloke arguing about his 90-day report at the other end of the table. He said there's 3 types of foreigner the girls out here learn to steer around. Every one of them's got a nose for it by 22. First one's the drunk. Obvious. Nobody wants a man who's on the hong thong by 2 in the afternoon, and I never was, so I sat there feeling quite pleased with myself. Second one's the tight one, the complainer, the fella who pays and then makes you feel it, who mentions the money, who does the sums out loud, who's got a running total in his head and shows it to you. They avoid him too, and honestly, fair enough. And I'm sat there thinking, well, that's not me either. I'm 2 for 2 here. And then Ray says the third one. The third one's the man with no opinions of his own, the one who never says no, the one who never asks the second question, the one who agrees before you finish the sentence, the one who's so grateful to be wanted that he'll take whatever version of things he's handed and thank you for it. And Ray said, and he wasn't being cruel, he said it the way you'd tell a man his tire's flat. He said, that one's not avoided because he's bad. He's avoided by the women who want something real because there's nothing there to hold on to. And he's found very quickly by everybody else because he's visible from across the road. I sat there with my coffee going cold. 31 years. 31 years of a man in a hard hat telling me where to stand, and me standing there and being proud of how well I stood there. A marriage that ended with me saying, okay. A crew boss saying, guys, we know, and me signing. A woman saying, my mother, obviously, and me nodding. I didn't get picked because I had money. Anybody could see I didn't have money. I lived in a 9,000 baht room with nothing on the walls. I got picked because I was agreeable, because I was the easiest man on that soi to say yes to. That's the whole of it. That's what I came here to tell you. A man who never says no isn't kind. He's not easygoing. He's not low maintenance. He's not a good bloke. He's just the path of least resistance in a pair of shoes, and everybody in the room can see it except him. So here's what I do now, and you can laugh. I don't mind. Once a week, I say no to something small on purpose. A fella wants to swap seats. Somebody wants me to come to a thing I don't fancy. The lady at the laundry, different laundry, puts too much starch in, and I take it back. Practicing, 64 years old, learning to say no like a kid learning to swim. It's going all right, actually. I'm still in Yomtien. Still got the 800,000 in the bank and the visa's current. I've got a chair on somebody else's balcony on a Wednesday and about 11,000 Canadian I didn't send to a land office in Royette. And I put a picture up on the wall in April. Nothing special. A photo of Sheila's kids. But it's up. That's Murray from Red Deer, Alberta. What stays with me about his story isn't the money, and he'd be the first to tell you $9,000 barely registers against some of what we've covered on this channel. It's how ordinary every single step was. A woman's rent, a mother's medication, which was real and which he'd pay again tomorrow. A child's school shoes. Those aren't scams. Supporting family is woven right through Thai life, and a great many good relationships in this country involve exactly that, honestly and openly, for decades. The failure here wasn't that Murray gave. It's that he never once said out loud what he was giving for. He never asked what she thought they were. He never drew a line because he'd never in his life been the one who drew lines. And the woman he calls Knock, I'd ask you to be careful with her too. She had a Thai partner and a daughter and a mother losing her feet and a family who'd handled things this way before. And somewhere in all of that, she also liked the big quiet Canadian who never shouted. Both those things sat in her, side by side, and never once argued. So the question in the title is a real one, and it's the one Murray's still working on. The drunk knows he's the drunk. The tight-fisted complainer deep down knows too. The third one is the only one who can't see it, because agreeableness doesn't feel like a flaw from the inside. It feels like being nice. If you're watching this and you've just recognized yourself, that's not a disaster. Murray's proof it costs $9,000 instead of everything, if somebody gets to you in time. And if there's a man at a table somewhere trying to slow you down, and you've decided he's just bitter, buy him a coffee. Ask him one more question than you want to. Thanks for watching. This is Thailand. If this one landed, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you on the next.